Okay, and we're recording. So, we're just talking about starting this podcast, and yeah, we're talking about how Joe Rogan is sort of our model because it's a really cool way of having interesting conversations with people. Yeah, so he started with 20 people, he said.
Or around that. That's what he said. I don't remember what episode it was that he said that, but yeah, it was very few people.
It's it. Have you listened to those first podcasts though that he did? Which because it's really interesting because actually this week I listened to the first two or three, and they're very different from the current Joe Rogan episodes.
Oh, really? Yeah, I think they're more ads in the beginning, right?
Uh,
Uh,
it, it's more that it's kind of terrible, to be honest.
yeah.
They're really bad. And it's not so much philosophy. Those ones are mostly comedy and like really.
He's
Uh,
not that great a comedian. He's a much better podcaster than comedian.
yeah, I mean, I don't know much about comedy, but I like his podcast better. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's mostly okay. So the second podcast, I think it's the second one. So you have an idea. He basically like 5 minutes into the podcast, and it's him and this other guy. I think his name is Brian Redband. And
I've heard of him.
yeah, so it's the two of them in the beginning, and basically the second podcast, Joe Rogan, after they're talking about something inconsequential for 5 or 10 minutes in the podcast, in the second podcast, and Joe Rogan decides that he needs to take a shit, and he goes to the bathroom and talk, and you can hear him talking from the bathroom while he's taking a shit.
Oh my god, that's
Yeah,
hilarious.
and I'm saying taking a shit because that's the word. That's how he described it. Oh man, I think I need to take a shit now, and it's really bad, so I need to go. So this was the level of professionalism in the early days.
Wow.
So
Yeah, I mean, he's had a few more recent ones where he made really outrageous jokes, but he doesn't do it that frequently. And I feel like with Spotify, now that he's with them, he's probably going to do it even less. So, yeah.
well, there's been kind of a controversy really with the Spotify. I don't know if you've read that. Since he moved to Spotify, they've been really there's a bunch of people at Spotify that are not comfortable with some of the people that go on his podcasts. And
Yeah.
they've been kind of like on his case about that, and basically the podcast, the Spotify podcast people, like the editors, they've been really pushing to edit his podcasts, and a bunch of his podcasts actually you can't even see them on Spotify because they don't have them there.
I
Because
think was it like the ones with, so Gavin McInnes, I know they like blocked those. And maybe the ones with like Stefan Molyneux, or do you know those people?
I don't know the specific ones. No, I just know that some of them are missing, and some of them, a lot of them actually, they want to edit the podcasts, and obviously that's kind of that defeats the purpose of getting Joe Rogan's podcast on Spotify because people want to watch what they want to watch. And but all these employees, they're saying, oh no, we're gonna go on strike because we're not comfortable with this. But I mean, obviously Spotify, they want Joe Rogan. They want Joe Rogan to be on Spotify. If you edit Joe Rogan's podcasts left and right, it's not going to be the same thing, right? So Spotify is basically saying, oh, we're not going to edit anything. Just deal with it. But it's kind of a controversy. It's an online controversy. But the only thing that has done is Joe Rogan has already become the biggest podcast on Spotify, which is crazy because it just started. Hey, Craig, we have
Good
Michael
evening,
here.
guys.
Michael is a new member, and
I know Michael.
Yeah, we've met a lot. I know Craig pretty well.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, we used to do the caffeinated philosophy thing with Frank on Sunday mornings.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Craig, have you seen Joe Rogan?
What's that?
Have you watched the Joe Rogan podcast before?
I probably about 30 seconds of it before I decided that I had no interest in it.
Why?
Because I am not an IDW guy, and he's right smack dab in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Well, but it really depends on which one you watch, because definitely they're very different. Like, it depends on the person he's talking to.
Well, I believe that, but
Yeah, because that's kind of the cool thing about the Joe Rogan podcast is that it's not really about Joe Rogan anymore. It was in the very beginning, but really the reason people watch the podcast, I believe, is because you get to see all these different people, like the Snowden podcast, for example. You know, it's very interesting to listen to Edward Snowden or Bernie Sanders, but then you get Jordan Peterson or Sam Harris. And it's a very different podcast. Or Kevin Smith, who's a comedian / filmmaker, and it's just silly comedy. So it really depends on the guest. Or Elon Musk smoking weed. Every podcast.
I'm delighted that you guys enjoy it. I wish you well.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think you can categorize like he has people from all over the spectrum. Like if he has Bernie Sanders on his podcast, like, can you really call that like an IDW episode? Or yeah, I don't know. Like at least not every episode I feel like is exactly like the stuff you hear from the IDW, like Jordan Peterson and all that group. But yeah. I guess, do you think you can pick and choose which episodes you want to hear?
I feel much the same way with books. So I pick and choose the books I want to read instead.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to agree. I feel like you don't have to agree with all the episodes to be able to get a lot out of certain individual episodes. Like, yeah, he had like Andrew Yang on one episode.
That's a good
he had
one.
Tulsi Gabbard on another. Yeah.
Yeah, the Andrew Yang episode is really interesting.
Yeah. Did he have him on twice, actually, or just once? I forget. It doesn't matter anyway.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think I watched one, but I don't know if he went there twice or not. Well, one thing that is pretty interesting about that is that I was just reading about recently. I think it's because I was reading about Joe Rogan recently. I don't know why I was reading about Joe Rogan, but it doesn't matter. In any case, Andrew Yang and also Tulsi Gabbard, when they went on the Joe Rogan podcast, they became like a force to contend with in the primaries. Before that, they were pretty inexistent, in the polls. So it made a huge difference for them to go on the Joe Rogan podcast, which is kind of crazy to think about it.
Yeah, no, it is crazy.
I didn't actually think that it would have that sort of impact, but I guess, if 20 million people are listening, I guess that's gonna make a difference.
Yeah, no, it was definitely good for them that they were on it.
Yeah. So, Craig, you were involved in some of the discussions in the chat. So that was kind of because I didn't know what to talk about today, but I was just looking at the discussions. One of the things that you guys discussed recently was about masculinity. Is masculinity a good thing? Are there bad and good types of masculinity? You talked about that a lot. Does Trump embody a particularly bad type of masculinity? Jordan Peterson. Are masculinity and femininity social or biological? So maybe we can start, unless you guys want to start with a different topic, we could just go start with that topic. But I'm also cool talking about something else. I'm just going through kind of like what I saw in the comments in the chat. Sorry.
I think that's a good topic. Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, Frank, how's it going?
There he is.
Hey, what's up, Frank?
Not much. Howdy ho.
Howdy.
Yeah, guys.
Speaking of masculinity,
What's
Captain America?
Frank is Captain America?
He is.
Captain America.
How come?
I don't know. You want to say something, Craig?
No, that bench press and body of yours, right?
Alright.
That's Steve Rogers from top to bottom.
Oh, yeah.
So, Frank, I don't know if you heard that, but we're just talking about potential topics to discuss, and one thing that people have been talking about in the chat is masculinity a good thing? Different types of masculinity. They talked a little bit about the model of masculinity that Trump brings to the table, or Jordan Peterson talks about masculinity. And if it's a biological thing, or it's also, or if it's simply social. So that we're about to start talking about that.
Okie doke.
All right. So I don't know who wants to go first. I mean, there's lots to talk about.
So yeah, I haven't dug too much into the scientific research. So most of, I guess, my views on it are informed by sort of my own life experiences. So, for example, I've played a lot of chess. I've done a lot of math competitions. And in both of those, you can see they're both very strongly male dominated at the top end. And some people say that that's due to interest, that boys and girls have different interests. Some say it's actually Jordan Peterson. He talks about like the distribution of IQ versus men and women, and he says that for men it might be flatter. I don't know whether or not that's the case because I haven't seen too much of the research. But there's three theories. So it could either be purely sort of society based. It could be that the two are just as, or their skills and intelligence are sort of on average the same, but the distribution's flatter. And then it could be they have the same skills and intelligence, but their interests are different. So there's kind of those three theories. So that's kind of my understanding of it so far. So yeah.
So by the way, have you seen The Queen's Gambit? Because that's the show I'm watching right now.
Oh my God, I just finished that show tonight. It was amazing. I love that show. And
I'm getting to the end now. I think I have 2 episodes left, and it's absolutely amazing. I don't know if Craig and Frank, I don't know if you guys have seen that, but that is an amazing show about a girl who plays chess, who becomes a chess champion.
You know,
I've certainly met plenty of women who have played chess and Go in my life, so that's cool.
yep.
yeah, so it's kind of a very hot button issue, I feel like. Some people are very on the side of men and women are the same, have the same brains essentially for the most part, and that the differences are mostly societal driven. Other people believe it's more like 50-50. Some people believe, like I said, that they're just as intelligent, but they have different interests. And not just, I guess intelligence is just one, but like across all different kinds of skills. So there's all different kinds of theories. But yeah, I haven't studied much like hardcore scientific research on it. So all I have is sort of my own life experience, really.
So okay, the 3 options are men are smarter than women. Is that one of the options?
I would say not many people.
For chess.
For chess, I would say the theory is more that I would say it's more that the very top men are better than the top women, but then the bottom men are worse than the bottom women. So it's like the distribution is flatter. That is one view, and that's a very controversial view. I personally am not sure. But yeah.
And the other 2 options are that men are more interested in women. That's the second option, right?
Yeah, that's the second option.
And the third option is that I'm sorry, what's the third option?
Society. That society pushes men more than women. And it might not be 100% of one of them. It might be a combination of all three. But those are sort of the options that I'm aware of.
Okay. Yeah, I mean I think that's a good example, and that kind of applies to math as well, right?
Yeah.
It's a simple, probably demographic.
An inclusive OR, is that what we're talking about? That we can have a possibility of all three options, or
Yeah, it could be a combination of all three. Exactly. Yeah,
or at least two of them.
or at least two. Yeah.
inclusive OR means it could be any combination of any of the given possibilities. I mean, you use it a
And
lot.
in fact, is probably all of them simultaneously. And of course, hey, machines are going to wax our tail on all of those things anyway, so it doesn't really
We're
matter.
already
We
losing.
know who's smarter.
We're already losing badly in chess.
Oh yeah, there's no question about that. Computers would just crush us now. We have no chance.
Well, not so long ago, people were adamant that computers just didn't have the sort of imagination that is required to play chess. And obviously, a computer would beat me. You know, I like playing chess like you, Michael, but I'm probably not as good as you. I'm not great, but they were saying, oh no, a computer would never be able to beat a world champion. That's impossible because a world champion, okay, they're really smart, but they also they study their strategies. They have imagination. They have creativity. You can't combine that in a computer. And that was only like, I think 10 years ago, people were still saying that, or 15 years ago. And now, I mean, they have models that beat everybody, including the world champion. So that has definitely changed that perception.
Yeah, they need to talk to Gary Kasparov for a while and see what he has to say.
Who was the first guy that had the unfortunate distinction of being the first world champion that lost against a computer? Was it Kasparov?
I think so, yeah.
Maybe.
The match versus Deep Blue, that's the famous match. But Gary Kasparov, he's had a lot of sort of videos on YouTube talking about the latest AI and neural networks. He's still very much involved with it. Like, I wouldn't say he's like bitter about the rise of computers. I'd say he's actually quite excited about it and likes it.
Yeah, and I mean that's fine. I guess I phrase it like that because, you know, that's kind of the proof. That's the ultimate proof that, I mean, computers can beat us at stuff like that, you know, because before that it was like, oh no, chess. Okay, at least some things that require some creativity, we can still beat the computers. It doesn't matter that they have more processing power, but now it's, you know, we can't really say anything like that anymore.
You kind of digress from the masculinity talk. I mean,
Oh yeah, but I would say, yeah, sorry to kind of go in a different direction, but yeah, I would say chess is just one example. But there are other examples where computers still can't beat humans. Like chess is a very structured game, and you have to play by exactly those rules, and there's only a limited number of possibilities.
Computers that play chess and Go are coming up with new strategies that they've been doing for a while, that haven't been figured out by chess players and Go players before. They do have the internal motivation that mathematically we value so highly.
The funny one is not only chess and Go, but I think it took about 3 days for a program to become a world poker champion. And if you want to talk about a not obviously computational in the normal sense kind of game, that would be poker, right? That's how von Neumann, when he first was developing game theory, that's what they said. They said, hey, John, you mean, you know, games like chess? And he said, no, chess is a well-defined form of computation. No, I mean things like poker that involve bluffing and strategy and things like that. And it took like 3 days for the bloody thing to start beating.
How's that even possible? How can a computer play poker?
Oh, you can't bluff a computer.
No, it does bluff. It's trained to bluff.
Well, the computer can bluff, but you can't. How can you read?
Oh, by the way, welcome Sashir and Jay.
Hey, Sashir and Jay.
Hello.
You guys are looking at the emotional side, the external motivation. What we need to look at is internal motivation, or how it's procedurally mapping. It's basically making a giant if-then map is what the computer is doing. And it's basically following that through. It has all the probability to every conclusion given off the knowledge that it needs, that it can make the best possible estimate or abductive reasoning for the incomplete set of data for all possible worlds every single time. That's why they can do it. There's no emotion or anything in it. It's completely abstracted out.
Right, because a human poker player is relying upon reading emotional cues from other humans, whereas a computer is just looking at tendencies.
Yeah, but
evaluating.
They're going off a simple a procedural map with directionality going, if they have this, then this has a probability of this and this, and if they have this and I have this, and this has a probability off of this and this, and it just follows that damn map to, that's the best possible way I can, should I bluff? Should I do this? What is the best possible outcome to these areas? So
but the thing is, it doesn't do this, like, the way game theory works is when it's in a given situation, it doesn't always follow the same strategy. So it might bluff 30%.
Yes, that's the modality of it. Game theory.
Yeah.
Yep. That's the beauty of it. What it has to take is because what it's doing is it's observing. You have logical necessity and you have empirical necessity. And logical necessity is off the definitions that it's been provided with, would naturally fall from it. But since it's making observations sort of off of what its human players are doing or anything, what it has to do is it has to, just given off their almost like assumptions, it has to reformulate new probabilities. And it can do that instantaneously. Well, not instantaneous, very, 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 very fast.
But the other problem is, how would you read a tell on a computer?
You wouldn't.
Right, because humans are trained to read facial expressions.
That's why you wouldn't, but what you would do is you train a neural net to look at what's been done previously in similar situations and expect that the same thing is going to happen again, right? That's how neural nets kind of morph themselves observationally to the data sets. Is the person's tell is another kind of data, that's all. And actually, if you put a facial recognition algorithm and stuff like that into your poker playing computer, it'd be able to read like nobody's business.
Right, but how would a human player be able to read?
I mean, it'd be more data, but at this point, I would look at it, I'd probably just keep it at the abstracted area. Okay, more data can always be helpful in most situations.
I mean,
how would a human player read the computer? I will go back to Jim Kirk and the Kobayashi Maru for my example from that. Reprogram the simulation. That's how a person does it.
All right, so you give the computer a face. I mean, actually, speaking of that, wasn't there a next generation where Data traveled back in time and beat a bunch of card sharks?
Mm-hmm.
Which makes me wonder about the enterprise poker games. Is the Data just promise not to cheat or not to allow his shipmates to win a certain amount of hands?
Are you guys talking about Star Trek? Is this a Star Trek conversation?
Could be.
Okay.
Could be.
But look, online poker, there's no sort of facial recognition or trying to read people, right? So some people are better at like online poker where there's no way to read the person. You just look at the cards that are dealt, right?
And you would think the computer would probably do better without the facial expressions and the social interactions, because at that point the data is more straightforward.
Yeah.
Right, but if you think about it this way, if a program bluffs at random, that already is a huge advantage. Because generally, if you're playing humans, you're trying to figure out their tendencies. That generally, let's say, this player, if we've been playing, stud for a while, if usually I see him when he's got a base card high, he'll tend to bluff. He'll tend to play through, either he's bluffing or he's just playing through.
That's a good point, because a human cannot be completely random, but a computer can.
Yes.
That's
now that ends up being pure luck, because if that's all the computer's doing, they can completely.
Well, what is random? Pseudo-random or actually random random?
Patterns. Like people have patterns. Even when you're trying not to have a pattern, you have a pattern. It's just how obvious that pattern is. But a computer, a computer can have no pattern if it's programmed to do so.
Now, what you could do is let's say you're in a situation and you think that you should bluff 20% of the time, right? What you can do is there's certain calculations you can do in your head to try to get like a random number from 1 to 10, let's say. And if you get a 1 or a 2, you could bluff. And if you get any of the other numbers, then you would not bluff. So there's kind of ways where you could try to do that, but it's harder. A computer does it easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just momentarily taking this back to the original subject of masculinity and femininity, of course, when Alan Turing wrote his original paper in 1950 that introduces the imitation game, at first he didn't talk about computers. He introduced it in the context of if you put a man in a room and you put a woman in a room and you had a judge asking them questions, would they be able to tell which one was the man and which one was the woman, right? Because so even back to that was the original Turing test. It had to do with men and women, not with humans and machines.
That's kind of the problem, because we can say there are certain tendencies in our society or in any society that we're talking about that men seem to have or that women seem to have. And we can have that be, inductive or abductive based off of our observations. The only problem, though, is if I say something like all women have this tendency based off of an observation, that's a fallacy. That's applying a for-all to an observation. You can't do that. You don't have that level. So yes, we can see certain tendencies, and this is a big part of the argument for nature versus nurture. The thing is, I'd be on the side of they both matter. But I would say there are certain tendencies from when we talk about the sexes, and that I have observed with intelligence or with emotions or whatever. But the thing is, the only way to apply them logically is to say this tendency to this person here now, this person here now. If I try to say in any way, all women do this, all men do this, or anything, I fuck myself over. That doesn't work. That is logically unsound.
But you can make claims about averages, right? Like averages.
You make claims about that's the big thing, though. When people say, because all your claims are not going to be on inductive, not classic inductive. You're not going to have a complete observation to a general conclusion. You're going to have an incomplete observation to a probable conclusion. That's abductive, which that means your assertion is an interpretation. It's abstracting further out. It isn't actually about a thing. It's your interpretation of a certain thing. You've shifted the scope. It's not good science.
All these data things, like you get so deeply into philosophy and all this stuff about like data that I feel like most scientists would just be like, that's how you do a study. But I don't know.
No. The collection of data absolutely is part of doing the study. And the abductive reasoning that I bring up, that's part of how you form a hypothesis. The important part, though, is where we bring it to a testable, or we have a formation of that can be of a dictatorial statement that can be tested or falsified or have evidence that works against it. If I just have mere interpretations, like I believe all women are bad sports players, in my opinion, all women are bad sports players, anything like that, I've shifted the scope. I believe, in my opinion, those shift scope. And the thing is, you can't argue against the thing that is actually of the observance. You're arguing against my opinion or my belief of that thing. That would be a data interpretation.
And then when you do that sort of thing and you find out you're wrong, of course, being good Bayesians, we need to update our priors and go back and redo it again, given our new information. And eventually we asymptotically get close to something that one might call truth, although of course truth is a moving target. So
if it's about observation, this is a big thing any science teacher will tell you. We don't study truth. Indiana Jones. We don't study truth here. If you want true philosophy classes down the hall, we study facts.
Yep.
And
that's a good one.
Yeah. That's kind of the thing. Yeah, we can make these observations and they may give us a little bit of a better understanding. I would push for the thing, because I know a lot of people, I'd say any observations that are based on large-scale tests of behaviors that are going to be categorized. The big problem that comes about is, how do you come up with the categories and how do they pertain to your observations? I know one of the big tests that gets argued about by the Peterson fans is the ocean test. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, I forget the neurotic.
Agreeable
and neurotic. And the thing that I read that entire study, and the thing that I always didn't quite get was I was like, you have these 5 categories, and I get, you kind of explain how they pertain to these phenomena you've observed, but I can't help but feel they're ambiguous. They're purposely ambiguous terms that can pertain to a lot of different, I even took the test afterwards, that can pertain to
Can you explain a little bit, Frank, what's that exactly that you're talking about, that test? What is it?
The ocean test is a large-scale psychometric test that was used to measure tendencies of adults in the age range, I want to say mostly around 30s to 60s around the world. It was a big test. And basically, they pooled data saying people with certain types of sexes had different tendencies towards different behaviors, and it was supposed to be grounding it to your neural, how things happen around. I saw it as a big limbic system test. So your language center word reference tests that basically people seeing certain words. Really, it was just presented as a test where you could say you more agree, you less agree with something, you more agree, you less agree with something, and it was along just a handful of questions, and it was meant to kind of give you a psych diagram. It's a really simple test.
Usually tests of that nature give you great insight into the mentality of the person who devised the test.
Yeah.
Yeah. More than the people who take it.
So
I honestly thought it was a little bit too simplistic. I really had a problem. I was like, this does not feel nearly rigorous enough to be considered.
Oh, big online test being rigorous.
Okay, the golden standard for scientific tests is usually doing what's called a double blind.
Right.
Because, the person who's, conveying has a test subject and you have the tester, and they both have a control and they both have a test area and they both have, almost a placebo and an actual test area. So both of them can't be entirely sure, when they're testing and when they're being tested. This is a terrible explanation. I can find a better way to explain this.
It's okay. It's okay. So what were the results of the ocean test? Did it prove that there was a difference between the sexes? Is that why Jordan?
In certain cases, there was differences from what they measured between sexes, mainly between tendencies like caring versus tendencies of neuroticism, and tendencies such as extroversion versus outgoing, and the other one. I don't fucking remember it.
Okay.
But
how is this?
there were other notes that while there were differences in sexes, there were higher differences in age gaps, that there happened to be overlaps in certain communities. There was definitely a huge amount of outlying data on either side. You always had your people who would go completely off check of the norm. But yeah, That was kind of the thing.
So I'm curious to know, did they come up with any results that did not match their incoming expectations?
I couldn't tell you. I don't remember right off the top of my head. The biggest one I remember off the top of my head was they did not expect there to be as much of a difference in age versus sex. Was the biggest one that I remember reading about towards the end. But I cannot tell you exactly how it went. It's been over a year since I read that study.
Well, I don't know if Sashir, I don't know if this was you who brought it up in the chat, but one thing that I think is kind of proof or really makes me think that, you know, you can't just say that everything is nurture. I don't know if it was you, Sashir, but that thing about people that are born with a certain sex, but it's not very clear. And then so basically someone who's a little bit ambivalent, you know, when they're born, they're kind of like male, kind of female. But the doctors, they have to attribute you to one sex or the other, basically. And in some cases, when they have done that, the person would then try to live his or her life. Apparently, there are some cases of guys who were basically, they were made into girls, right? Because that's easier biologically. So they were made into girls. Okay, so you're going to be a girl because it's physically, you know, the doctors had to either push them to either to one side or the other. And so they became girls basically, but then they, throughout their lives, they were like, okay, but there's something wrong here. And actually they felt like men, you know, not, or like boys, you know, so it didn't feel quite right, even though the doctors tried to make them girls, you know, that their parents tried to make their girls, society tried to make them girls, but they just didn't feel right in that position. I don't know if it was you, Sashir, that brought that up, those cases, but
Yeah, I think that was me.
okay. But
There
those
have been cases like that of someone who was, I think there was a couple of cases where there was a botched circumcision.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to explain this without like watching a documentary or reading an article, but in some cases it's not at birth, it's not completely certain if you're going to be a boy or a girl, because you can fall into kind of like the middle, sort of the middle.
Yes, there are plenty of, or not plenty, but there are people who are born intersexed. I mean, there are people.
And I can't really explain because I don't have the medical expertise, but basically the doctors will then kind of like push you into one side or the other, and that has shown that sometimes, you know, there is something that is not quite just the nurture side, you know, there is nature, there is like, even if they try to make you a girl, if you're not a girl or if you're not a woman, I mean, sometimes it doesn't work. So there must be something there that is not. That's why I think that kind of kills the whole. This is just nurture. Sorry, this is just society that is pushing us to one side or the other.
So I gotta ask, where are you going with this? What?
Well, I'm just we're talking about if masculinity is something that is given to us by nature or by society. So that's just where I'm going with this. You know, I think that we can't just say that it's society. I think there is a biological element to masculinity. Now, what that means exactly or what percentage, it's a different, you know, issue. But there is, that element is pretty much present.
But I think that with the cases that Bruno was mentioning,
and sorry guys, this
was a situation
for a while,
and that might have been due to where someone was born biologically male because of some accident. They essentially tried to make the person female, and they didn't react to that. But that part of just might be where biology intersects with culture, because their reaction is maybe they do feel like they're male, and they're just interpreting what are the cues to being male, the cultural cues to being male. Even though they've been treated, they understand that culture has has decided that males and females are somehow treated differently, and maybe on some level they're reacting to that.
Well, that's where I kind of feel like us trying to say, when we put this in a versus or as a certain dichotomy, nature versus nurture, or nature or nurture with an exclusive or, I feel like that just sets us up to wrongly represent this argument. And the thing that I feel like we kind of all are in this camp of saying like, no, it's column A and column B. It's a little bit. We have a Venn diagram. We don't have two separate circles here to represent. And almost all of us are in option C, which is, yes, both of these. And as to masculinity, yes, we do have social norms. We do have, I believe, we have social norms and constructs that absolutely perpetuate an idea of what it is to be a man in today's world. We go to gym, we drink beer, we, talk about philosophy on Zoom. There's a lot of things.
Well, philosophy has traditionally been associated with masculinity, just like chess and just like math.
Yeah. There have been a lot of great women philosophers, though, regardless.
Yeah, true, yeah. And
yeah, I mean, this is to philosophy's detriment, if that is, and I wonder if that is as true outside of Western culture, because we haven't studied that much of the Arab culture. I would guess the Muslim influence probably was male dominated. I would guess in a lot of ways Chinese was to some extent male dominated, although maybe less so than we think.
Well, ancient Greece was male. I mean, our heritage.
And I don't know if this is just a coincidence, but we're gonna get our first female philosopher here today, Alice.
Well, I think the argument that yes, gender is a cultural creation. That said, that doesn't make it any less real.
Yes, that was the whole thing. Just a cultural
society that has gender.
I'm going to be like, well, pretty much anything that's abstracted as we understand it causally from a certain time point is a cultural creation. That might be a little apt.
Right, but I think our reality is shaped by culture. I mean, we could say that gender is a cultural creation, how we treat the genders. That said, they exist. I mean, it's not a matter of saying whether it's right or wrong. It's just for what this is the society, the reality we live in.
Well, yes.
Yeah, right. Cultural consensus is a real thing, and we deal with it all the time. In fact, it's probably the dominant thing in our lives because, we don't actually live on that desert island all by ourselves, as some of us might have wanted to at one time or another.
Right, but I think with the case of the people who were, essentially gender reassigned unintentionally in that case, is that yes, there's a biological component that somehow they could understand that they didn't fit, that that at some point the biological differences were noted and that became a cultural phenomenon. So if you're whatever the gender dysmorphia, you're reacting to, this is the way culture treats a gender that for whatever reason you don't agree with. You don't feel like it fits you.
I was given a question by TK at one time. He said, do you feel like women should play football? Something like that.
And basically I said, yeah, if they want to, why not? And he said, well, do you think women should play football with men? And I said, are they able to? Is there a woman who's able to compete at that range or that area? And like, say hypothetically, if there was, I'd say, why not? If they can do it, it's not a possibility. It's not hypothetical. This person can do it, compete at this level, or can show that they can do this area, then why would we consider them, say they couldn't at that point, except to influence a preconceived bias or dogma, just to say, oh, they can't.
50 or 60 years ago, that same question would be asked of black males. Right? Can they go on the same field with white males and compete? Well, I guess they can. And I guess that we won't know whether or not women can until they try it.
It's a little bit different though, because black males, I think that was just being racist basically, but here we're
As
talking
opposed
about.
to sexist, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, not when we're talking about sports, because I mean, if we're talking about chess, yeah, maybe, but you know, Frank's talking about football, which you
Yeah,
know,
let me get
people
to
have
more-
different bodies.
and this is one of the areas where we come up, and yes, there are very real, I will say there are very real, I believe there are very real biological differences
Yeah, of
between
course.
men and women, especially muscle structure, bone structure, that make it fortuitous for a male in some circumstances and a female in some circumstances when we have different situations that they're in. That being said, if the male or if the woman, regardless of what we preconceive them as, can do the thing that we're asking them to do, I'm not saying a percentage or anything, I'm saying this hypothetical person can do it. At that point, what point do I have to deny them of them doing it because of a category that I have already enforced that to this outlying set of data doesn't apply apparently?
You've never had a reason to
Well, I
do
can
it.
speak to martial arts because this actually is a debate regarding allowing transgendered
I had
athletes.
a woman wrestler on my team in high school. She could kick guys' asses all the time. So
And there is, and this is in regards to there, because in sports like wrestling and judo, they're weight classes. So you can make an argument that the weight class applies. That's one of.
Except that at the highest levels, you know, high school, they don't even divide them up by gender. If you make a weight class, regardless of your gender, you will find that weight class. It doesn't even matter. At least that's all wrestling.
Right, but there's been a couple of things brought up. One is the quote kind of Juana man that, what I don't think carries much water, is the idea that men will claim to enter a women's division to try to, like this idea that if a male wrestler or something will call themselves transgendered so they can enter a women's division to win a gold medal. So I don't think I think that's there's almost no. But the other argument is, in terms of for sports like MMA or boxing or football, is that men have more upper body strength on average than women. Is that if you're actually, even if the weights are relatively equal, if you're more dangerous and possibly risking more injury because a man can punch harder.
It comes about we have one woman who has the same amount of upper body strength. Did it. I don't know how she did it. I'm talking about a conceivable. She did it. Okay? Let's not worry about the biological possibilities or anything. She did it.
Yeah, I think like if a woman can compete at the level with men, I absolutely think she should be able to. I mean, this is the same. I think this actually happened in chess. Like Judith Polgar, she's probably the greatest female chess player of all time, and like they wouldn't let her compete with the men, so she like filed a lawsuit. But yeah, if you can, why would they draw a barrier? I think that, yeah, I agree with that.
In every case of philosophy, that'd be a case of mistaking what you want to be, what should be for you, for what is. You're completely disregarding your observation or a set of data.
There have been mixed. I mean, there's the famous, battle of the sexes between Bobby Riggs and I can't believe I'm blanking on her name right now.
Yeah, there's a great movie about it.
Right. Yeah.
Billy.
There was also
Billie Jean. Billie Jean
Sorenstam, like 15 years ago, tried playing on men's PGA events, and I don't think she made the cut. But part of the difference was why Annika Sorenstam was, fairly strong for a woman. She couldn't drive the ball as far as some of the men.
Well, there's definitely a biological difference there. I mean, a woman can't play at the same level as a man because of the strength,
I wouldn't say, okay, that's another thing. These are all observations. I already brought up sweeping statements. When we say a negation to any observation saying a woman can't compete at the same, say, for all cases of the game of golf.
Well, I'm talking professionally, right? I'm talking about the top.
The upper echelon.
If you're cold,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if I played Serena Williams, I mean, that would be, I would lose 6-0, 6-0. I mean, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, if you're talking about the top 100 in the world, right? I mean, that's just not, because the strength is not the same.
But this, I mean, that raises an interesting question, because you're talking about the people who are the best. So when we talk about, can women compete with the best men? And I mean, the general answer is probably not. But what does it mean for the best women? So this concept that women compete on their own kind of category does this destroy that category if you can fluidly change between, men versus women's teams when we're looking at the best performer? Or do we just say we only look to men's sports when it comes down to who is the best physical performer?
Well, I think like in tennis, tennis is a great example. Tennis is the most successful professionally. It's the most successful female sport for females, and they compete at their level. You have the best females in the world and the best males in the world, and I think that works just fine.
So there are men's sports and then there are women's sports. Is that what we've concluded?
Well, that sport specifically, it's both for men and women. But I'm saying you have both sports.
So we're saying, I don't know very much about the sport, so I apologize. But we're saying that particular sport, the women, if it were men against women, the women would be the best of the best. That's what we're saying in that particular sport?
Well, in tennis, a woman probably wouldn't be able to get into the top 50 for men. They've tested this, so we know. But I mean, maybe if it's Serena Williams, she would kick everybody's ass. I don't know. But generally speaking, for women in tennis, I don't know how relevant that is, but in tennis, they can't compete against the best men. Just it's a matter of strength, like when you have like perfect technique, like the top tennis players in the world have, it comes down to, who's strongest, who's fastest. And in this case, men just have that biological advantage, and it is what it is. It's like in MMA, which is another sport that I follow. Even amongst men, it's not the same to be a welterweight and to be a heavyweight. A welterweight that fights a heavyweight, even if they're both men, the welterweight is probably not going to be able to hang with the heavyweight. That's why they have different weight classes to make it interesting for everybody, and you're not going to look down on the welterweight champion of the world. I mean, the welterweight champion of the world is very good, and he's fantastic. And they even have pound for pound rankings and all that. It's just that you acknowledge, even if they're both men, one guy is like 250 pounds. The other guy is 170. If the guy that weighs 250 pounds punches the guy that weighs 170, he's going to have a pretty big advantage. So they have different divisions.
You're pointing out something really interesting, which is their weight classes. So you can, put people on a scale and say, get on that scale, we're going to weigh you. And, a pound difference is going to make, maybe you'll argue about which scale you're using, but there's a pretty clear line between whether or not you belong in a certain weight class.
Yeah, of course.
Is that the same for gender?
Well, it is in the sense that you acknowledge that there's an underlying physical difference, right? In terms of size, basically, size and strength, right? And if you weigh Nadal and if you weigh like Maria Sharapova, you're not dealing with the same thing. The body is very different. Nadal is a beast. He's like has super strong arms. He's super fast. He's a guy that even amongst men, he's privileged for that game. Physically. So the woman is going to be different. She's very good, but she's not going to have the same level of like physical attributes as him.
So the difference between men and women in your mind is whether or not they have a certain weight class, whether it's size and strength. So
exactly.
We should define gender that way.
Well, no, I mean, in terms of sports, right? We're talking about sports.
Sure.
Yeah, in sports, you have different weight classes. Yeah, I can't fight at heavyweight. Even if I was very good at I would never be able to fight a heavyweight because I'm just not that big.
Well, I'm going to point out something interesting was that in the early days of the UFC, they used to do these small guy versus big guy matches. and it
Bring up Gracie.
necessarily dominated by the big guys.
Which is fantastic. The UFC, the early UFC. That's how I got into MMA. You know, is because I watched the early days UFC. But it's also true that Royce Gracie, who was a relatively small guy and was winning, I mean, he was winning against guys who had no idea what the ground game was. You know, so like Royce Gracie today would get his ass kicked.
So how much of this do we extrapolate from the relatively culturally insignificant area of professional sports to the rest of human endeavor when we start making these gender comparisons? Because, okay, maybe in some sports there are some pronounced differences, but so what?
Well, I think we can acknowledge, if anything else, that there are biological differences, and you know, it's not a problem to accept that. But also, there are a lot of similarities. But you know, that's just basically what we can say is that there are different. The biology is different. Now, how different? You know, that's something that's the interesting part to discuss.
And our point for caring about this a lot is.
I actually think if you guys want to, I'm sorry, Frank, go ahead.
Okay. Usually the thing that I hear get brought up with this conversation, the thing that really stirs people up, is when the biological differences are used to justify disparities observed between men and women in day-to-day life and everyday life. Like pay would be example, or hiring, or not sports players, not people going on these extreme areas, but differences we see between men and women just on day-to-day things. And oftentimes I have heard or I have observed people say, well, these disparities are justified by the biological differences of these people. So as an after fact. That's
one other example, just to piggyback off what Frank said. I think another controversial one is jobs in tech, how they're very currently weighted towards men rather than women. So yeah, the question is that justified? Is it due to discrimination? Or is it like the natural playing out of things, or a combination of both? So that's kind of how it actually applies to, I guess, probably more important questions in sports.
I think I saw an interesting statistic saying that women in STEM fields now, of basically like Gen Z, are actually either catching up with men or even exceeding women basically in STEM majors. So that might be something that changes. I think it started out because mostly men were in STEM majors.
That could be. I remember I was an actuary. I used to work as an actuary at a company in Minnesota. So this is all, or Minnesota, close to my apartment. So this is all very anecdotal, but I know when I worked there, it was like 90% men, 10% women. But that's just like one anecdote. But yeah, I've heard the gap is closing. So yeah, this is kind of the center of the controversy. Is it discrimination? Do we have to take bigger measures? So yeah, figuring out, I guess, the right balance is the question.
You know, there's another one, which is basically women who are transitioning, competing with different women in weightlifting or other sports. Yeah, I don't know what to really think about that whole thing, but it's pretty. It's a hot topic right now. I should say.
Well, there's the Caster Semenya case, the South African sprinter who they've actually determined is actually intersex, and it's not because she's just naturally that way, and she actually has to take hormones in order to compete. They basically test her for her testosterone level because she has naturally higher testosterone levels than most women.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting.
I do not think the identity of a person, whether it be gender, race, whatever you want to categorize it, it can be causally linked to observations of that person by us. You know, but that is not the whole identity of that person in any case. Gender would be, to me, it would be similar. I could look at a person, I can say, from my observations, I think you are a woman, I think you are a man, but if the person says, I'm a, they basically refute me by saying, I say they're a woman, they say they're a man. And I can point out all this different areas, of my observations as evidence to try to refute their claim. But the thing is, as it's their identity, who they are, what they are, it's internally motivated. It's not externally motivated. So they've already convinced themselves rigorously of what they are. So evidence, the scientific way, wouldn't exactly make sense versus what they're doing, which is much more akin to the mathematical way. It'd actually be weaker on my end to argue against that. So I don't know if any of that made sense. I think that was stupid.
You kind of lost me a little bit, to be honest. Do you want to do you want to say that in a different way, Frank? Maybe. But it's okay. I mean, I don't know. Maybe other people understood.
I don't know.
Well, I think the problem with sports is an area where biological differences, especially in sports like sprinting or swimming, do make a difference. I mean, having just a different body composition does. And so in terms of like an intersex or a transitioning athlete who wants to compete, say if it's a woman transitioning to male, they probably can't compete because that would essentially be doping.
That's
if you're
the thing.
artificially taking more testosterone, you're basically doping yourself at that point. That's why the Castro Samaya case is interesting, because she's requiring her to essentially dope down.
Okay, but hold on a second there. If the reason when you compare how male athletes and how they perform is this one has certain genetic qualities that optimize them for that sport better than the other person, then in a sense, although it's the way they were born, still it's a genetic advantage.
Yes.
Right? So why isn't that treated as a problem?
That's why, again, I can't speak for but that's why the Castro Samaya case is so interesting. I mean, it's basically they had a question of what is actually her gender. But again, I mean, I'm sure she decided to, if she wanted to compete as a male, I mean, maybe she could. And I don't know enough about her or why, or whether they would allow her to compete as a male. But this gets into why, there's so many doping scandals. I mean, obviously, Lance Armstrong naturally himself probably has, he has a good BO system where his body naturally uses oxygen much more efficiently than most people. That said, he also was doping himself to get more of an edge, because probably everybody else, riding the Tour de France already has an advantage over most people. It's just when you
they're
push
all
that.
doping. It came out that the top 20 were all doping.
Right. Yeah, it turns out pretty much everybody in
Which to me just kind of points out the fucked up nature of big money competition pressure.
Right.
Yeah, it's
I
sad.
think we were talking about this at one point about like the future of sports, and could there be a league of people who are just completely doped up that we would watch? And we are, just like, yeah, we fully recognize that these people are like beyond human, and they're fun to watch. Like, what's the point of sports?
It's basically the WWE.
Right.
Or what
There's
about don't they have
weightlifting. That's basically like that. There's different classes of weightlifting. That's basically like that. And then there's also football. I know this is what some folks think, that in football there is doping happening. I don't know, but I know in some weightlifting classes that they don't even test for drugs. So, yeah.
Well, the WWE, I mean, they don't publicly say that, but that is pretty much
I know.
what they do. I mean, no, the bodies you see are not natural. Those,
No, I mean, they're obviously very, very adulterated.
right. But again, we keep on hearing stories about a lot of WWE people basically destroying their lives or taking other people with them.
I mean, Brock Lesnar, I mean, what is that? You know, he looks like a giant horse. I mean, he doesn't look like a normal guy, like a person. He's just huge.
Brock Lesnar is all natural, guys. 100% natty.
Who?
Brock, he's 100% natty.
Yeah, 100% natural.
I don't know when he started doping precisely. I know when I wrestled, we had a scale cutout of him when he was wrestling for fucking the U of M in the wrestling room. Like, if at any point in his life that man was natural, it's ridiculous. I don't.
He's insanely big.
Like that. I don't know.
Right, but you look at him; he has suffered.
The whole point was to get away about this, to talk about average life and the justifications of the injustices.
Hey, I didn't say anything. You guys keep bringing it back.
I didn't bring it.
So, does this mean then that we should probably equate masculinity and cheating?
Well, I think, okay, so to change the topic a little bit, but still talk about masculinity, just to finish the topic. So, okay, we figure out some things. I mean, they're pretty obvious, you know, that there are some basic biological differences between men and women. Okay, we all acknowledge that, but we all acknowledge as well, I believe as well, that, you know, there are some social components to masculinity. So, is our vision of masculinity changing now? And does it need to change? I mean, are there people are talking about toxic masculinity a lot, you know, and you have like people like Jordan Peterson that are defending masculinity, just to throw out a name. But, you know, a lot of people are talking about visions of masculinity, what masculinity should be like. So maybe we can talk just a little bit about that. You know, what like that social construct of masculinity, what should it look like? Are we on the right path?
What's one of the interesting things, because I was sorry to make it political, but I've been a lot of steps saying a lot of Trump support, especially among a certain segment of African American males and Latino males, is due to the kind of vision of masculinity that Trump presents.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think that is a good theory that you have there.
But even his support because one thing people were not expecting was that Trump actually still maintained a pretty strong support among white women. A lot of that is looking, saying that there is a certain acceptance of this vision of masculinity that is very anti-female, but there's many white women who still accept that vision.
They do, like, yeah, so it's another thing, right? In leaders, we do traditionally look for that, and I don't think we should be, obviously, but it's something that we look for, and there are some women who probably look for that in leaders too, and so they think someone like Trump, who has said the things that they do, that he says, is probably, you know, a masculine man or something along those lines.
So, but a lot of
It's
those
interesting that I was in a group of some friends, but someone said Trump reminds me of my dad, and it was funny enough. I kind of said there are elements of him that reminds me of my dad too. He would hate to hear that, and I definitely didn't vote for Trump. But like at the same time, like there are some things where he seems like a very, I don't know, he seems somewhat relatable, which is kind of interesting.
Well,
yeah,
what are those things, Ellison? What are so what are we talking about here? Like, well, and Sashir and TK, you also mentioned Trump. I mean, what is that? I don't necessarily see, I kind of know what you mean, but I don't necessarily see, like, why is Trump masculine? Like, what is that masculinity that Trump?
I think the blind confidence, like the beating your chest. I used to know someone like that I regularly worked with, and during business meetings, he would come in and tell everyone, you know, he had very limited information, but he would tell people what he thought, what direction he thinks we should go in. This was a leader a while back. I don't work with him anymore, but he would essentially come in beating his chest about what we should do, even though he really didn't have boots on the ground, but he sounded really confident. You know, he's not gonna, no one's gonna shake him. And, you know, he's going to claim to know more than he does, and that was like almost a power move. And you know, I love my family dearly, but like I see it in some kind of, you know, family masculine type of energy where that is for some reason how you become powerful or persuasive in the family. And even though I'm not really, like, I don't support that in any way, or I'm not that way. I mean, maybe I am. I'm more confident than I think some people are, obviously are. But like, I feel like facts matter to me. But like, he comes in without having that much background and just confidently says what he believes, and that, I don't know, for some reason that seems familiar, but not necessarily good, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, Trump is a master marketeer, and whether he's like this or it's a creation, if you look at a lot of kind of quote strongman authoritarian leaders, one of the things they do emphasize is a certain inflated masculinity. I mean, Putin is very obviously, but since you're Brazilian, you look at Bolsonaro, and you particularly look at the language he uses, how he portrays. He certainly portrays a certain hyper masculinity about himself, you know, to the point that it's not just masculine, but also he insults his political opponents. Somebody Trump does, using by feminizing them, you know, by calling pussies.
The blind confidence. There's something about the blind confidence where you're like, yeah, okay, like apparently he thinks he's powerful enough to say this shit and not like get killed right then and there because he has enough people believing in him. That's interesting. For some reason, that feels familiar. Like,
It certainly worked for the Fuhrer.
I'm going to take a little bit of like an evolutionary perspective here. So I think I have a theory on this, but I think like historically men were needed for war. And so it's like you would want a male leader who is like, you know, would really try to like get everyone pumped up for war and like realize that they have to fight the enemy in a way. And I feel like nowadays we're not going to war. At least most people aren't going to war constantly, so it's like a very different situation. But I feel like that's sort of still somewhat in our psychology a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's certainly. I think the dawn of patriarchy probably started from even going back to hunter-gatherer society when people started killing each other. And necessarily certain tools, like if you had more upper body strength, you could throw a spear farther. You could thrust a sword with more force, and that necessarily happened to favor men because we just happen to have more upper body strength. And at that point, then you started developing a patriarchy.
Man, I love that quote, Craig. Craig shared the quote by Charles Bukowski. The problem with the world is that the intelligent people are full of doubts, while the stupid ones are full of confidence. That kind of just sums up the last 4 years.
Well, from what I've been hearing here, though, somewhat the definition of masculinity seems to be coming into the shallow end of the Dunning-Kruger graph. And that concerns me, having, you know, being a male and knowing that I do not fit into that particular mold and have no desire to be put into that particular mold by anybody. It annoys me. And it annoys me that it disappoints me in my fellow human beings. We'll just leave it at that, I guess.
I don't think there's anything wrong with having a concept or a category of, you know, masculinity, what is feminine, or any of that stuff. But what Allison, you're in the middle, so I'm going to point down to you. Just described to me from Trump just sounded like to me, the person beating their chest, beating anything, being needlessly prideful and having no understanding of their own humility or their understanding or lack of understanding in a situation, to me, would be a categorization of what seems to be part of toxic masculinity from what we've observed is arrogance, just being blindly arrogant.
The word I've frequently seen used with the whole thing is, of course, the kind of Spanish-y kind of word machismo. And machismo is
Don't go drawing that in, because I like to
something
use
that
that.
annoys me a lot too.
I like that.
Well, part of what I think about Trump's support is that, and also the sense of maleness, is a very aspirational sense of maleness. It is the idea that, you know, if you get the money, you get the power. I mean, to quote Scarface, you know, then you get the women. And Trump has always been, you know, marketing off of this aspirational idea down that, you know, he sleeps with all these beautiful women. He's got all this money. That's gold. I mean, that is purely the Trump brand is all about aspiration. Yes, and now the Trump brand applied to politics is about this kind of aspirational view of basically making America great in a very narrow sense of what is greatness.
Yeah, I'm sure, you know, Genghis Khan or Napoleon or many other despots in history would align very well with that's how you handle the people. I believe it was, wasn't it Goebbels who talked about how you keep telling the people a lie often enough and eventually they believe it. I think that was, and I'm sure he wasn't the first one to come up with that, but.
Right, but if you look at the modern kind of model of the authoritarian strongman, it's Mussolini. And to some extent, almost every authoritarian sense is kind of modeled themselves in some way after Mussolini.
Oh, Mussolini.
Oh, I'd have thought Mao would be my.
Yeah, but Mao would never.
Stalin.
And Mussolini came first as well. I think he was
right
modeled from Mao to some extent.
But clearly, the idea of like Putin riding with that around without a shirt on, and you know, some of the language of Bolsonaro. I mean, again, you can look back to Mussolini.
For sure, yeah.
And what do we think about that? Is this something that we think we should teach our young men to emulate?
Well, I think that's one part of masculinity that we should definitely not aspire to, because I mean, we're basically equating masculinity with basically just talking out of your ass without really knowing anything, just being confident without having substance. And I mean, that kind of disturbs me a little bit that people would see that as masculinity, because I think, I mean, personally, I don't think, I kind of understand. I think being confident is an element of masculinity. And that, I think that's perhaps because women look for that in men, or it seems to be the case that they look for that in men.
I actually believe the blind confidence and kind of arrogance. Allison brought up her father. I know I experienced it a bit with my stepdad. I'm willing to bet you guys might have done it too. But I think a lot of it, that experience with fathers from children, a lot of it comes from, you know, kids expect their parents a lot of times to know everything, to be able to describe and deal with pretty much everything. And a lot of times your parents are pretty limited. And the father's standpoint, it often gets to, moms do this too, it gets to the point where you're pressured in, where you kind of just got to talk out of your ass. You got to double down on your bullshit. Pretty much playing to a sunken cost fallacy.
Yeah,
just people don't find out.
You know, becoming a parent is something that is really weird as well, because you realize that parents are just people, and that you know, when you're growing up, you think that your parents are really they know everything, like you're saying, Frank, but really, I mean, they don't. They never did, and it's kind of a weird realization. Okay, so they were probably just making it up.
2-year-olds are the greatest logicians or mathematicians of all time. Do you know why? Because they haul you around just going why, over and over and over again.
Well, 2-year-olds are also psychopaths too. So
there might be some overlap there.
Yeah, I think there's a balance. Like, I think decisiveness can be important in a leader somewhat. you don't want a leader who's so indecisive that they sort of can't make up their mind. But you have to balance that with actually, you know, having the information and like, so yeah, I think there is a balance there. And I think there is something to be said for decisiveness. It's just the issue is when it goes too far and you're just acting confident. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Decisive leadership is very much desirable, but to brag and just say things without having anything to go on, without having real information and without really understanding things, that's really a weakness in leadership.
Yeah.
I feel
It
like
is. And so one of the things that happens is like you can't, I think one of the things we had to really talk about is you can't go up to the podium and basically like give the pros and cons and stay there and like try to decide what the best thing to do is. So sometimes these leaders just pick something and they just kind of go with it. So we need to be better at that. Like, you know, Trump is clearly an outlier. He doesn't even understand the fundamentals, I think, for most of it. And he just is like, no, this is what we're going to do.
Who won the presidency?
Huh? Yeah.
Who won it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question for Allison. I mean, part of, again, this idea of this aspirational sense of maleness, and there's been a lot of talk about this idea about the bad boy and the appeal of the bad boy. In some sense, I mean, as a woman, I mean, how do you react to this idea when people talk about, well, you know, no, women don't like guys who are weak or indecisive, but sometimes that means they'll like the bad boy who does what he wants, who doesn't show any regret or any really self-reflection about what they're doing.
I mean, I don't know. It's kind of like, it depends on the person, I suppose. I honestly, like, it's like basically saying like people make bad choices. And I think that goes for both genders, kind of like, you know, someone who's a bad guy, like guys go for girls who are bad girls, like, but the bad girl stereotype is like, oh, you have a girlfriend? Great. Like, I don't know. I mean, there's not like, maybe there's a stereotype there, but like, it's kind of to me the same.
Well, it's interesting because there's basically been a cottage industry built out along this. I mean,
I think being rebellious is kind of sexy, you know, like being a little bit bad, you know. I think, and I agree with
for guys and girls, or just guys.
I think, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think it probably goes both ways.
I think it does.
Yeah,
I make bad decisions because the people who are like the bad chick or the bad guy probably means like they have their interests at stake. Like they're selfish. They're gonna throw you under the bus first at the end of the day. And like there's something really attractive about people being like interested in something that they like. But ultimately, like that means they're probably putting themselves first. So
what is the bad girl? Like there's bad boy is something that's in the media, but what is the bad girl? Like, what would that be?
The bad girl is a bad guy. She's a bad guy.
Same qualities, Allison?
I was just like, you know, like the Billie Eilish, like bad guy.
Well, Angelina Jolie is kind of like the bad girl, you know, like she's like someone who's mysterious, kind of dangerous, you know, especially like, you know, Angelina in late 90s, early 2000s, you know, doesn't play by the rules, you know. It's like this. I think that having a rebellious soul is something that is inherently sexy. Like James Dean, you know, he's like the quintessential. Marlon Brando, you know, like people like someone that goes against the rules, you know. Someone
is that the same thing for men and women? Do you guys think?
So I think so, but we see it more with men, and that might be just. I think women. I think probably because of culture, we've seen it more with men.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I mean, I think we shouldn't ignore the fact that there's cultural elements here that, like, guys, for the most part, like, there's a glorification with control. And, like, a guy who can control, you know, like, maybe there's some sort of idea that the bad girl is somehow, like, more in control than he is. You know, that's a control, that's a power, like, who has more power type of dynamic. And I don't know, I think that plays into, like, how people choose to identify themselves. Like, are they a powerful individual in society? Do they like, to take direction? And, there's some like concept that men should have control, and they like part of their identity is to have power and be liked based on what they do, regardless of others, maybe, or because they're going to hit another boy with a stick and he's going to win because he's more powerful. I mean, these things that are like ingrained at a very early age, and maybe they're biological, I don't know, but
I can tell Frank really wants to speak.
Notice the language used there, we've often been using, is there's an idea that men should have control. There ought to be a thing, and this comes back, I brought this up multiple times throughout our conversation. When these people say this should, ought, or anything be this way, this goes all the way back to our sports conversation. It's in complete disregard to the fact that my entire area would be like, well, has a woman been in control? Has it happened? Has it shown to be possible? If it has, your stipulations and possibilities for ought are just that. They're in complete disregard to what has. Ergo, you're not practical. I don't know. You look like you're stopping me. So I'm gonna
no,
stop.
Frank, I can't. I'm sorry. I get distracted by these little things, but it's like it sounds like someone's moving your mic or something.
Yeah, I think, Frank, I've noticed that. That's your mic is a little.
I'm rocking back and forth my little wheelie chair.
Oh, okay. Well, it's
And we need to get to a headset.
I was trying to figure it out. So if I look too
Yeah,
confused,
don't move too much, Frank, because it gets a little bit distracting.
That's impossible. Hold on.
I'm
Yeah,
actually
I know,
pretty
Frank.
simple. I'm not thinking of anything you're saying is wrong or incorrect. It's more just, wait, try it out.
Hello?
I bought those headphones on Amazon and I returned them because I didn't really like. They were too. I have a small head. I mean, it looks like I have a big head in this video, but
Yeah.
But you sound good. Now I wish I would have kept them.
Oh. Goody.
Can you guys hear me okay? Do I sound okay? Because I'm also using a microphone and I don't know.
No, you sound good.
Yep.
No, you have that big fancy one, right?
Well, it's not super fancy, but yeah, it's like a microphone, yeah.
Yeah, you've got your podcast mic.
Yeah, does it sound okay? Because I don't know how it sounds.
No, it sounds great.
Okay.
Sounds good, man.
Yeah, I have to be careful not to speak too far from the microphone now. So I don't know if I'm doing that okay.
The gist of what I said, Allison, or anybody else who is just kind of recapitulating or resummarizing the point I've been making out from this whole entire conversation is that I feel oftentimes when people say, should a woman be in power, we use should, ought all the time, is in disregard that women have been in power. They have been in power in the modern world multiple times. And regardless if you think they should, or you think that these qualities give people more or less, or because it is that qualities of extension, it's happening. So your stipulation is just that stipulation, regardless of what is happening. It's delusion. It's not empirical.
It is
How do I
somewhat
sound, guys?
empirical. I mean, it is somewhat empirical, isn't it? Like if you look at, for example, the number of women in executive positions, Kamala Harris just became VP, but obviously there's not as many women in executive positions.
Yeah, I didn't apply a quantity there. What I simply said was, have women been in power in modern times? Not have they been in power more times or less times? Has it been done?
Of course,
there's Margaret Thatcher, there's Golda Meir, there's
and understand, we talked about game theory and I brought up modality
Angela
in that.
Merkel.
And pretty much what we're saying
That's
is
a
we're
big
no
one.
longer arguing if it is possible. It's possible. It's happened.
Agreed.
It's completely different at this point.
New Zealand, that's not having the big COVID crisis, and geez, they happen to have a woman prime minister. There's Finland, that's got not only all women in charge, but they're like all under 40.
But then we get to the other
young
point.
women in charge.
Exactly. We get to the next point, whereas people are then going to try to go transitive. They're going to say, well, are the women better than men, or are the men better than women, or less than or better than?
And it's going to take generations to answer that question.
Yes! And even the generations will be incomplete because it is an incomplete set of data.
Well, I think that we're never, to some extent, we're never going to be able to answer that question because politics has changed in a very substantial way. Like politics now is not what politics used to be, and that is it's very evident how it has changed. And someone like Trump, I think he would always make a terrible leader because it doesn't, like, the confidence part is not that important. The important part is when you're confident, but also when you know what you're doing, So if you're confident and you just don't have anything to back that up, I think that has always been a recipe for disaster. But
here's the thing, though. We can say Trump was a terrible leader, and I would agree with you. And the thing is, someone can say he's a great leader, but in both cases, we're acknowledging he was a leader. He was a president. It happened. So really, the difference is the quality that we are conveying to the two situations, which I'm not going to say is completely doesn't matter or anything, but if we're going to have any type of objectivity, we have to have either transitive value or we have to acknowledge the context that it's in. He was better than so-and-so for these sets of reasons.
Well, I think he was one of the worst presidents ever, but
worse than for these sets of reasons.
Does this tell us about the leader, or does this tell us about the people who are being led more? Because I think it reflects equally, at least equally, upon those two.
Regardless of leader, what this is telling you right now is how we would categorize if we have problems like should women, any quality extension, how we would categorize those in abstract formula.
But regardless of that, and yeah, that's true. But I think that, just to finish my point, like politics, I think the world has changed very substantially, because before, politics was to a great degree was about international relations, and it was about war. International relations was much more war-driven than it was diplomacy-driven. And now I think
Machiavelli and Florence would disagree, as you would say that war was very internally driven by the warring states or warring families inside of it.
Right. Well, okay, but international relations was mostly war-driven. So being a very good leader in war was essential to be a good politician, to be a good leader, just because you were involved in war so much. But now in the 21st century, especially in the big powers, war, now it's going to be more important to be able to avoid wars than to actually win them, because a war is just devastating. A nuclear war would be devastating. Even if you win it, I mean, that would be terrible. So now
but not all wars are nuclear wars. Actually,
not all wars are nuclear wars, but a lot of wars, basically a lot of wars, you want to avoid them this day and age. Yes.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Part of what it's
different. It's different. Before, you wanted a guy who would be able to beat your enemies, that would defeat your enemies. So that's how politics has changed. And maybe now more than ever, we need some people that like female leaders. They'll have to navigate different waters than people had before.
Right. And it still
Michael
does explain the popularity of, again, people like Trump, Bolsonaro, Erdogan, who do explicitly make very public shows of force.
I mean, those guys are idiots, because like in the modern world, we want to avoid these wars. We need to avoid these wars, because if not, we're all going to kill each other. So, I mean, that is like, these are all guys that really they have not adapted to the times. And you look at Bolsonaro, he's a guy who's been in the army his whole life, and he's looking at his leaders. His role models were military leaders of the 60s and 70s. I mean, that's a completely inadequate model. You look at Trump, this guy's in his 70s, and he was a reality TV host and a businessman. I mean, and his model of politics is make America first, make America great again. I mean, it's just ridiculous stuff. we need in the 21st century, obviously we're going to need leaders that do understand that there's a high price to pay with war, just because it's the reality. It's not because you want to be a pacifist.
Well, but what you're seeing though is, I mean, I would liken it more what we see in the last 10 years to being much more similar to like in the 20s and 30s when we had a rise of a lot of strong men. But you look at, you know, not besides Trump, but you got Putin, you got Xi, you have Modi, you know, all of these essentially, you know, strong men. They deliver, they call themselves strong men in some cases.
This is a time when we need to look at history, and people actually need to study history and understand that, yeah, I mean, there are problems with that model.
But studying history is considered feminine, so I don't know if that's going to happen. But I was going to ask you, you call these guys idiots, and then the question I have to ask back is, what does that say about the people who put them in power and let them remain in power?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the appeal of Trump, he tries to create the perception that we're at war. Like he talks about how we're losing to China, Europe, they're not sharing the burden in what do you call it, defense. So he tries to create a perception that we're at war or that there's an emergency. Mexico, all these illegal immigrants are trying to break into our country. So if he can create that mentality, that gives him sort of the advantage in terms of being elected, because he is supposed to be the strong, decisive guy, you know.
That's populism 101, right, Michael?
Yeah.
All of these are come to power through populism.
Exactly. Let's find a common enemy. Well, with Hitler was the Jews. I mean, the Jews and the communists and the gays and the gypsies, you find the common enemies. In his case, for some reason, I don't actually know why, but he got obsessed with the Jews. I don't know if it was like, I don't know why. I mean, he had like some enemies to choose from, but he decided that the Jews were going to be the big one. Maybe it was working in his speeches. Actually, there's a documentary on Netflix about Hitler, which is excellent. One thing you learn about that from that documentary is that he was very good at giving speeches, and he learned from people. While he gave speeches, he learned. Basically, he was a guy that he understood, like he would give the speeches and then he would read the crowd. And he reiterated the things that were popular with people that he was talking to. So maybe that's where the Jewish thing came from. I don't know. But basically, yeah, that's populism 101. You find some enemies. You find some enemies and you unite people.
Oh no.
Their common hatred against those enemies, even if they're made up. Sometimes like the Jews weren't really the enemies of Germany, you know? I mean, they weren't really the reason why Germany was not in a great spot, but you know.
This would be a good point to point out that it wasn't just Germany that was persecuting the Jews in Europe.
Right, yeah.
It was also Russia and France and Spain and England and pretty much everywhere.
Yeah. There was already...
Yeah, but Hitler kind of doubled down on the issue.
Well, the Russians did a pretty good job too.
Yeah. Come from someone who has Prussian ancestry, let me tell you. Oh boy, there already was some.
What was that? What was that?
I don't know. Wasn't me.
That was me.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think one other thing to consider is how much are Trump and all these other leaders kind of a reaction. I mean, one thing when we were talking about these kind of archetypes and male archetypes is there's been this kind of counter reaction towards Marvel and Disney in terms of the female superheroes. So there's been this, you know, complaints about how much Marvel with like Captain Marvel and how much they've been giving these female superheroes.
The word you hear them use all the time is Mary Sue is what they'll call some of these areas, which Mary Sue is actually supposed to refer to, was originally referred to someone who wrote a Star Trek fanfic, self-insert, that they just made their character awesome in every single way, got along with every person. And they're kind of accusing Disney people, especially Star Wars, new Star Wars and stuff.
Right, yeah.
Doing that with the characters. But yeah, I think it's a reaction, but at the same time, I don't think that just kind of grounds it, causally grounds it. Says it's happening because of what happened before, or because of this is happening now, which I don't think that's a big shocker or anything. It's more of a, not to sound mean, that's just kind of a duh moment for me.
Right, but you could say there's a lot of kind of in culture that's basically driven by reactions. I mean, you could argue that the popularity of Jordan Peterson
I'd
is
say
probably
pool
because
balls
of a
are driven
reaction,
by reactions.
right, towards essentially this culture. What, you know,
Any
many fields
procedural map or any sufficient that you have for causation after Hume, as we recognize it, is driven by reactions. So
Right.
I don't see what the big deal is. That's just a fundamental observation of logic.
Well, this is kind of an extrapolation of what we're talking about in a way, but like that need to find common enemies, right? Something I notice is that people that consider themselves in the category of young white male, some people think, you know, that's a, you know, very important category for them. They listen to some rhetoric that says, okay, the enemy is like the liberals, the crazy liberals. The crazy liberals are
Radical liberals.
the radical liberals are trying to take the spot.
Radical left.
You know, yeah, the radical left. You know, look, you got to have some enemies, and if you think you're under attack, it's a weird thing that people do with their minds, and you know, like they create enemies that are not there, and they create categories that are not really true. But they, you know, we have these fictions. We have like our dynamics as groups are very complex and weird, and as we evolved, it doesn't really seem that our level of sophistication has really evolved all that much, because we still come up with like very simple categories, and we just need to figure out some enemies that we can all fight. You know, it comes down to that, and that it doesn't really reflect reality a lot of the time.
Well, that's a natural part of group dynamics, is that we have us versus them. Why are we us? Because of them.
So I think that I mean, in a crazy way, that, and now like people have, they attribute too much importance really to things that should not really be that important. You know, oh, who's in the new Star Wars movie? Oh, what gender or race are the new Marvel heroes? You know, and they see that as something that is existential, that really is going to affect their identity and their lives, when really we should be probably worried about some things that are more important. And yeah, I mean, some of them, okay, so they're attacking the young white male, and now the young white male is being replaced by Black Panther, you know, or by Captain Marvel, and that creates a certain level of discomfort.
Well, what a lot of arguments that Trump support is basically because of 8 years of a black president, too. But I mean, these are kind of outliers and symptoms in many ways to people who target Marvel. But the fact that that's even an issue, that people are going to get so upset about, you know, Captain Marvel, about a female superhero, it's kind of show. But that's why, looking at, again, the popularity of someone like Jordan Peterson, who's essentially giving a pseudoscience justification for traditional norms, is a reaction to what this term you frequently hear from the right of kind of a culturally relevant society, or relative society, sorry, cultural relativism.
But that's the thing. If we're trying to talk about norms, or we're talking about what is the most likely thing to come up about, when we're talking about norms, we look at a set of people interacting in their daily life, and we say, every person in this set seems to be more likely to go do these tendencies or this area, and these are then going to be the norms. We have the group. Well, then the thing is, if we use that norm then to disregard any outlying sets of data on that area and say, because that is not the norm, that we're back at the same argument again. It's the same as, because it's not the norm, it ought not be, we disregard it. It's on and is again. This is all on and is. I don't know. Keep
Well,
going.
if you
sir.
think Marvel was bad, they're all going to really lose their shit pretty soon because after Daniel Craig, the next James Bond is going to be a young black woman.
Neat.
Woo. That one is going to be a doozy for them.
Yeah, that'll.
Who gives a shit?
Well,
I
apparently
mean,
a lot of people
if
do.
if you
my
find
point.
endearing points in it and it makes you feel good, golly, nice for you. If
Watch Doctor Who. Do you guys remember that?
no, I don't.
Sorry, Allison, can you repeat that? We kind of lost your mic.
Oh wait. Mic check. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Now you
Much
can
better.
hear. Is
Yeah,
that Snowball?
What?
Blue Snowball?
It's a snowball.
Oh, that's a
Nice.
good USB mic.
Big mic.
Do you guys remember Doctor Who?
Yep.
No.
Yeah, of course.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you know, Doctor Who went through plenty of transformations, and no one like got on him, right?
Yeah,
Until
the,
it
the
wasn't
new
him anymore.
the new Doctor Who is a woman, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
She is, yes.
Although ratings
Yeah.
apparently are pretty down for the new Doctor Who, and I'm not sure how much.
You know what? That's just the haters.
Yep.
Just kidding. I just personally like Doctor Who. So.
I mean, okay. I can actually. I'm starting to formulate. Any of you guys? Spoilers for anybody who hasn't watched it. Any of you guys watched the last seasons of Game of Thrones?
Yeah, of course.
That time. Okay.
Everybody has watched or should have watched it.
Or anybody.
Sorry, man.
Okay. I'll keep this very vague then. Okay. There were instances that bothered me in it because it wasn't because they were marketing an idea of feminism or anything like that, but it became more to me they weren't following the principle of Chekhov's gun in theater. Any of you know Chekhov's gun's principle is if you show a gun in the movie, it needs to fire by the end of the movie. Or there were things happening in the plot that just seemed like they wanted to push to a certain base or pander to a certain base without being consistent or respectful to the viewer in doing things. And I know that actually did piss me off. And a couple of those things did actually happen around women in that area. I actually was worried that I was becoming a little bit more right than I had ever intended.
We're losing you, Frank. What are you going
Well, Daenerys was a bad girl. That was the thing. We got to really make Daenerys.
No, they were just shit writers.
That was partially why she was maybe sexy, you know, because she was a bad girl.
Yeah, that was they took the crazy hot scale from
Was
I
she?
can't remember
or
what
was
TV
she-
show
Yeah, she was mad.
applied that to the character, which seemed very forced. I think it.
Okay, I got another example. I didn't care for Star Wars Episode 7. I didn't care for Rey because I did actually think that she was becoming too much of a Mary Sue character into the fact that she knew how to do all these things, but they never explained how she knew how to do them. That's
those movies are so terrible, though.
But
Star Wars
that was a thing to me, and
it's right. And it's hard to say whether Star Wars was bad because it was politically correct, or Star Wars was just bad because it was just bad.
It was just a mess. I mean, I don't know, man. But it's so hard to talk about those movies because they were just bad movies.
So, just as a counterpoint to all that, of course, some group that did it really well, I thought, was The Walking Dead, right? Where the strong women in there developed organically throughout the plot over
after
several years of evolution, right? You see Michonne, you see Carol, you see just a lot of.
Yeah, I was fine with that actually.
Yeah, and well, the way they handled it was for a series like that was real.
Yeah,
right? That's how things would actually happen. Is people would organically evolve into those kinds of positions.
But
rather than
I think that's what people are having the problem at is when they're being thrown at that, the new James Bond is a black woman, or, one sound argument I could see them having in these instances is like, okay, I see you did that, but why and how did you do that? Or how is that?
Yeah,
they have a problem that it's, you kind of are just throwing it at them and then are going, this is just the way it is. Disregard how things were. And they want you to explain it.
I think the problem is when you have characters or these done as polemics. I think there was a problem with, especially the second Star Wars. I can't remember the middle of the latest trilogy, where it did become a polemic, where we got to cram in this thing about about classism by going to this casino planet, which is a very thinly veiled.
Yeah.
All right, towards criticizing Trump. I mean, we got to suddenly Princess Leia can fly through space. I mean, it just seemed like they're just going to force that in there, whereas you could still make, you can have a good story without it becoming a polemic.
Well, that was the thing, though. They had points, but we had problems with them because we felt they were forced. They were poorly. They were not rigorously sound. They did not tell us how they got from here to here to here. Explain it out. It's what I know. That's the problem I had. For fuck's sake, I'm still pissed I never got an explanation of how she got Luke's lightsaber. I stood up in the movie.
Right, there's plot holes too. I mean, you could argue like Black Widow is a female character. Obviously, she's got she's an anti-hero.
But
I'm sorry. Did I just hear that you stood up in the movie theater with your hands up?
Yeah, I screamed at the top. At the end of the Last Jedi, I saw it with my friends, and I told them, I was like, guys, don't worry, I'm going to be quiet the whole time. I'm not going to say a word. I was, and as the movie ended, I was shaking, and then just as it went black, someone started to clap, like a slow clap for it. And I stood up and I said, where the fuck did they get the lightsaber? And I just screamed it at the top. They stopped flying. Everybody was quiet. And I just walked out there. I was pissed. And they were serving alcohol there. So I was drunk and pissed. So
I might do it.
I'm sorry I missed that, because that would have...
I know, right?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to see the movie.
We got to podcast that.
I can't believe I actually watched all those 3 movies in the theater. I mean, that was a complete waste. But if I had seen Frank do that, it would have been worth it.
I just saw the last 2 on planes.
Oh, man.
I guess it's good. I didn't get up in the middle of the flight and start yelling, where the fuck they get that lightsaber?
I mean,
might not have been a good thing to do on a trans-Pacific flight.
I agree. Like, I agree that... I mean, those movies are kind of annoying. Not only are they really, really, really bad, but also it's obvious that they're trying to check all the politically correct boxes. And yeah, I mean, should that be like a cry for unity for all the disenfranchised young white males? I mean, obviously not. But I mean, yeah, of course it's annoying. It's annoying.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but of course that was the Disney-fied version of Star Wars.
Oh my God! And the Disney-fied version. I mean, what did they do?
They didn't apparently do the smart thing like they did with Marvel, which was let Kevin Feige do his thing. But
those movies are so bad. Honestly, it's just sad. Because Star Wars used to be cool before Disney bought it.
I don't know.
Well, but if you look at like Rogue One, has a strong female character. I've not heard anyone complain about.
No,
they're checking off the box with.
I loved Rogue One. I thought it was fine.
Solo, not so much, but Rogue One.
Right.
I didn't see Solo because Solo happened after The Last Jedi, and I was done after that.
I thought Solo was fine. It wasn't great, but it was fine. I mean, compared to those 3 movies, 7, 8, 9, I don't know. Like, it's hard to watch those movies. Those are really bad movies. I don't know if anyone liked those movies.
Oh, my friends all pretended or said they liked it.
Yeah, that's the weird thing. That those movies all got good reviews, and people were saying they were amazing when they came out.
Star Wars movies?
For like 2 weeks. After each movie came out, like for 2 weeks, there were great reviews, and people were saying that they were great when obviously they were really bad. So that was a really confusing thing.
Well, it made me feel completely just like, am I crazy? Am I doing something wrong? Because I kept bringing that up to my friends, and I had that yelling fit. And on the car ride home, I screamed about shit the whole time. And
the same thing happened.
We got home, and they kept saying, Frank, you're just angry because they didn't follow your fanfic. And I was like, No, I'm going to show you consistent points
Wait,
and how
I'm
they didn't
sorry.
follow
Can
through.
we need to just interrupt this again? You have a fanfic?
No, I didn't have a fanfic. They were just calling me that because I got
You've been
angry.
writing
Okay,
fan letters?
okay. I think maybe we need another
Frank's-
discussion.
Frank's
I
Last
only
Jedi.
I only write fan fiction about H.P. Lovecraft. Nothing else. Anywho,
There's fan fiction.
Did you do a Cthulhu Star Wars crossover? Is that fair?
and my BDSM 50
You should- you
Shades
should-
of Hegel and Marx.
You should let us read that, Frank. That would be interesting. H.P. Lovecraft is cool.
Mm.
I think an H.P. Lovecraft Star Wars crossover would be great, actually.
Anywho, but yeah, that was the thing. When I kept bringing it up and they kept saying that or disregarding my comments or anything, and it made me question if there was something wrong with me, if I was doing something wrong, or at that point actually doubt myself. And like, it's a very weird instance when you can sit here, analyze your own thoughts, say, no, I am sound, and other people are still disregarding you.
That is a weird thing. That's another example of weird group dynamics that we still have. If a lot of people are saying one thing, it's really hard to say something different.
Yes, I am saying Star Wars The Last Jedi gave me a full-on existential crisis.
Are you saying you're the only sane one and everybody else was insane?
Well, that's the
You're
thing.
questioning your own sanity or everybody else's?
You're questioning your own sanity. You go back to analyze your own sanity, and you can find no faults with your sanity, yet everyone still asserts that you're wrong or insane.
So you think then that it's possible that two sane individuals could hold wildly different opinions and neither of them be crazy?
Yes.
Speaking of movies, that's a plot of a lot of Cold War movies where you think you're the only one insane, everyone else is insane. So that's
why do you think that is? Why Cold War?
Well, that was like the plot, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers and stuff like that, where
and the
there's something wrong with everybody else, so that and the subtext was they're all being taken over by communism.
Ethan left. No.
Yeah. He was creeping.
You might not have liked the idea of oppressed white male.
Creeping Ethan.
Well, Ethan has his own thought processes that we should not try to understand.
He was here, yeah, he was here.
Or like before I joined, apparently.
No, he was here while you were here.
Just now.
He just
Not on-
muted
was
his
he not on
mic and didn't
video?
have a picture.
He might still be lurking. Is he in the chat?
He was
I hide the
creeping.
people who are not on video.
Oh dear.
And apparently I don't pay attention to them either.
Okay, just to go back to
he just said secret memes.
This very much relates to the nature versus nurture debate, but it's a little bit more vague, if you will, or a little bit more generic. But someone I just wanted to talk about because I thought it was pretty interesting, the concept of blank state theory or a tabula rasa theory. So basically that we're all simply blank slates to be written by our environment. That's the main idea.
Correct me if I'm wrong if we have any scientists here, but I'm pretty sure that's been just scientifically disproven at this point. Okay.
Okay. So
There's such thing as a tabula rasa?
Yeah, exactly. Tabula rasa.
Yeah.
So okay, so talk about that a little bit. I mean, what in what sense? Because I read the Wikipedia page just now because I was just reading through the chat and
I gotta order some food. Keep on.
And I mean, this has a long history of philosophers talking about it. So, but it's something that it has been scientifically disproved. But in what sense has it been scientifically disproved?
I don't know. I might be able to tell you. Hold on. I could look something up. I feel like I'm cheating when I look stuff up.
But
No.
But in any
There's too much stuff, Frank. You got to look it up.
But let's say it wasn't scientifically disproved, or let's just talk about it a little bit. I mean, how big of a role do you think genetics play? And I mean, can we talk about that people start from zero, or is there some sort of genetic memory? Because I think that even though we might
Okay.
know that there is a genetic
Those aren't the
memory,
only two options, Bruno.
Yeah.
for the other options, talking
Yeah.
Somewhere in between.
I was gonna say
Generally.
there's another
Inclusive
option.
ors. Inclusive ors. Use the inclusive. Just
But
say and or.
not only is it just a combination of one or the other, somewhere in between, you could also say that maybe part of us starts close to a blank slate, but the way in which we evolve could be different for men or women. So like same exact environment, but it would mold men in a different way than it molds women.
But that would be true of any two individuals, regardless of their gender.
Yeah, there just might be some kind of, I don't know, mechanism. I mean, yeah, no, you're correct.
And also, it doesn't. I didn't necessarily bring this up to talk about men or women. I mean, we can, but just in general, like what is really the role that genetics play? I mean, is there?
I believe
how important is the environment? How important is the genetics that we bring to the table from the start?
genetics play a significant role that I believe is undeniable, especially with all the breakthroughs we've had in that field. That being said, I don't think anyone here is making an argument against genetics play a significant role. I think the argument that people are making is it is only genetics. They're basically arguing against it's only genetics. And frankly, what comes in after that is a lot of times what I hear is genetics play a proprietary role. The environment seems to play after that the secondary and more emphatic role, the more forcefully large role in the person's life. Anybody get that? Do I need to rephrase?
Well, yeah, sure. No, here's the huge role, of course, that genetics
just
play.
to make
are
sure.
not chimpanzees or blue whales or octopi, right? That's the basis. That's the first significant role that genetics plays in determining what species you are and what capabilities that species have. But as far as
Bruno,
learned behavior, one learns behavior by learning behavior, and that would be the nurture part.
Yeah.
Okay,
Bruno,
well,
were you going to say something?
Well, I was just gonna make sure I understood what you're saying and that everybody understood. So you were saying that genetics is sort of like the base, but
Yes.
then the environment drives most of it.
I'm saying genetics seems to me to play mainly a role as, think of it as we're getting dropped. He brought up blue whales, octopus. Genetics seems to me to be playing more of a role of the game we're getting dropped into, or the history or time we're being dropped into. I am a human, white, of this time with these certain qualities. Yes. But when I'm then talking about it is as I'm raised in my environment more and more, because I am in that environment, I become more of a consequence of that environment. That's not to say I am just a consequence. That is to say, it leaves more of a mark on me over time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So an octopus,
sense.
An octopus is obviously, yes, just by virtue of it being an octopus, is not going to have certain same qualities as a human. That's fine. That's just to get that across. But once again, this is a compatibilist argument saying nature and nurture, yeah, it's both of them. There could even be a third or fourth option if I really wanted to start. Fifth option, sixth option, all the options.
okay, well, I've got to get going, so I'm going to go pick up some food. But
Okay.
there is a saying, I'll leave you with this, because some of you have probably heard this, that said that genetics load the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger.
Okay. That's
Okie dokie.
That's interesting.
Okay. Well, if you guys are still on in like 40 minutes, I'll check back.
Okay.
I think probably not.
Probably not. If we're already down 2 people. brother.
Okay. Well, have a good night.
It's good to see everybody, though.
But thanks
Good
for
to see you.
participating, Sashir.
Yep.
Yeah.
Night.
And I was actually I did hear this listening to the Joe Rogan podcast like just recently, but the idea of genetic memory, and also I did read about this as well. I think when today when I was doing some research because I saw that in the chat. So it's really interesting to me like that this idea that genetic memory that you can learn things from past generations, and it seems that it's uncertain how far back it goes, or like if you can get stuff from directly from your parents, like experiences. Like people are one thing that people have been talking about is that trauma can be transmitted genetically to some extent as well. I don't know how much you guys know about that.
There has been showing that there are certain psychological or neurological problems that can be transmitted biologically, such as schizophrenia, psychosis, and other forms. Yeah, it has been shown, or it has been observed enough to have. It has been observed to happen enough to have a high enough degree of certainty to say it is likely to be for these reasons.
I love that precision.
Thank you. Perfect modality. Perfect scope shifts.
It has been observed frequently enough so that we can be confident enough to say it's likely that.
Yes.
So what is the question we're trying to answer?
So basically, tabula rasa is a bullshit concept. Is that what?
Yeah.
what
So
we're-
we.
Yes.
So what next?
What next?
What's next is, I would say, is we realize there are sets of traits that can be passed down and can help us better understand what to expect of certain circumstances. And there are certain traits that we learn that people learn from growing up in an environment, and we learn to deal with those as appropriate as we can observe them. Either way, I mean, in our words, we let scientists do their fucking shit, and us as philosophers stay out of the goddamn way.
So,
Sounds
I
like a
mean, the
philosophy.
concept of epigenetic stuff I find interesting. I don't know that we know enough yet to really be able to say anything really definitive about it. But
The problem that I have with
an interesting-
epigenetics is because the basis of how it's defined makes it very hard to ground, because the basis of it as it is defined makes it very hard to ground in evidence or causally.
Okay, so I think what now you're kind of begging is how is it defined currently?
How-
epigenetics? Or what was what?
Epigenetics, someone should do the definition. I have a definition, but it's cartoonish and it's not going to be.
No. I feel like if you're concerned about epigenetics based on a definition that you know, I'm curious what that definition is, because it's possible that maybe we could add color to that, because it's my mindset that epigenetics is one of the most interesting things that we've discovered in the last couple decades, and it might mean something pretty substantial.
So
Okay.
what is exactly epigenetics? If you're saying
So what basically it comes down to changes in the expression, that is the phenotypes, without an actual change in the gene or the genotype.
That was the problem I
Without
had.
modifying the chemical structure of the gene,
Yeah.
you get different behaviors expressed, and those may or may not be inheritable.
Yeah. It was a problem mainly in the expression of the gene as we know it, because we've abstracted to the areas where we can show the expression of a gene. Girl Asher Bach, there's actually a chapter that does a really good job with this.
It's stuff like trauma. While you're talking about like trauma is one of those.
Trauma. I think famine's been something they've proven, like over the Irish potato famine.
Poverty, maybe.
But the problem with epigenetics, especially, is because as it comes apart as an expression and as they categorize it as such, it makes us very hard to have a type of abstraction that I can say, this came about because this prior, or if this, then this. I can't. It makes it very hard to have directionality, because in many ways it gets treated almost like a mutagen. almost
On
like
the other,
something
on the other
that
hand,
comes about.
that isn't
But the fact
necessarily
that
a
there's
bad
so
thing.
many individuals, for example, like the Irish potato famine for generations, we're talking, at least 4 generations, famine, affected people's genes to the point that they passed down genes to their children that allowed them to basically survive famine-like situations in ways that, prior to the famine wouldn't have been there. And we're talking about a very large group of people. It's not just a mutation that occurred randomly. There was a clear cause, which is the fact that people were starving, right?
Now, understand the word when you said famine-like situations. So you're drawing an analogy to the famine that happened prior. Now, when people survive the Irish potato famine, though we do have documentation of it, the idea when we say something is analogous, that they can survive a famine like the famine survived before, and because it happened like this, that we're trying to have an analogy with directionality in a construct. The problem comes about that I would then go like, how do I know that this is analogous or sufficiently analogous to this? And what is your abstracted principle that you can show me of this, which would be famine in this case? And then we say this person's famine X1 versus this, and this person's famine X2. How can I show?
Frank, get to
that
the
this is-
point.
I just did it. That was it.
I missed the point entirely.
You're worried about a
Hold on.
correlation causation type issue.
Yes. I thought that was very clear.
I also missed the point, to be honest.
Oh,
Okay. But I mean, we've seen
If
it
I had
to the
my
point where
board, I could show
epigenetics, I think, and I'm just going to recap it to the best of my ability. Please interrupt me if I've got it completely wrong.
I would
But
welcome a recap. Thank you.
Huh?
I would welcome a recap, so thank you.
yes.
Okay, as we know, sometimes they can get a little lengthy, so somebody like wave their hands if I'm going on too long. But I mean, so you're concerned about this correlation kind of factor that we're looking at we're looking at an Irish group of people that's a very specific subset of individuals who are then passing on genes, generations upon generations. Epigenetics, which is interesting, doesn't just look at the Irish, right? Like we're looking at abusive situations, like Bruno brought up, but we're also looking at like the macaque monkeys, which they've done studies on. And actually in Minnesota's like zoo, I went to the zoo school. We got to like learn about the macaque monkeys a little bit and how they played a part in these big studies, these epigenetic studies, that those particular, I don't know if you know anything about monkeys, but they organize a lot like wolves. I don't know if you know anything about wolves, but like in a hierarchy where
Actually,
like,
that's been disproven.
The macaque monkey study?
Nope, the wolf study.
Okay, well, I don't know enough about wolves. Like, I'm trying to make this relatable. Jeez, Frank.
Well, in both cases, we know they have sort of the alpha male.
Yep, that's been disproven.
I don't know anything. Okay, let's move on.
Wolf study
Send us the
specifically has been
information on the
disproven.
wolves. Let's focus on
It's
the
been
macaque
disproven
monkey.
with the wolves or the monkey?
The wolves.
Okay.
Okay, well,
Is
the
this an
monkeys,
example?
I don't know what
I
is
know.
or disproved with monkeys, but what we do know is that leaders of the macaque groups, the alphas, like walk around with like their butts. They're the monkeys that have like the red butts. They're like the snow monkeys that are like very cute, but also like you're like, what happened to your red bottom? So they actually like the way they position themselves and stand indicate like their hierarchy. So the ones that are like they stand tall, they stick their ass out, they're like the dominant males of these groups, and females have their own hierarchy as well. They're
I know nothing about these
a little bit different.
monkeys, so I'm trusting you.
All right, you look up this is what like one of the big studies in epigenetics, and what they found was these monkeys were born and genetics played a big part of whether or not they would become alpha, because surprise, surprise, the ones that were alpha were the kind of the larger monkeys, the monkeys that had kind of the best genetics.
What are the name of the monkeys?
Macaque.
I think they're spelled M-A-C.
Okay, let's.
MACAQUES.
Yeah, I just want to have the visual here. The macaque monkeys. Okay, yeah, I'm looking at the macaque monkey, but I can't see their butts. Where are the butts?
This is
Let's
what
type
Bruno's
macaque
really
monkey
interested in.
butts.
He's like, Can I get the butt pic?
Go ahead.
So
this is an interesting.
we're basically saying macaque monkeys have shown passable genes that have related through our observances of the expression.
Hold on.
Okay.
So this is what we know. We just, it's kind of the basic thing. Like
I'm trying to
you know
share
what?
this. The macaque.
What's happening?
Bruno's
Look at this.
attempting to share these.
They're working.
monkeys.
These are the macaque monkeys.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So these are the monkeys, and the monkey's eating like a mouse
They
here.
have like red faces. They're like known as kind of the snow monkeys.
I love the way they look, man. They're
But
so
they're in
cool.
Minnesota because they can survive.
How can they survive in Minnesota? It's so cold here. Oh, because
They
look.
bring
at
them inside. I don't
Look at
actually
that.
remember.
No, but they're good at it. Look, that's icy water.
All right. So what were you saying, Allison?
Yeah, Allison, go ahead. And
So,
I'll show one more
hierarchy.
picture about the butt, but you talk.
So like fittest of the fit, who's the boss? It's going to be somewhat genetically determined just because like we're talking about like, who's the boss, the biggest guy, right? Like the biggest monkey is going to be the one that everyone else follows. And they have something that's similar to a hierarchy. They respect the alpha type of monkey. They've kind of manipulated these scenarios where they tested prior, these monkeys' genes, they collected, genetic DNA of these monkeys. And then they kind of manipulated some scenarios where they ended up making kind of the monkey that was like, I don't know what the bottom totem pole monkey would be called, but basically the hated monkey, the monkey that was neglected.
The untouchable monkey. It's
the untouchable. They got to a point where they converted the untouchable to like an alpha like status based on like social kind of things that they noticed. For example, like you were an alpha if like certain females respected you. You were an alpha if you were respected by elders. If you were an alpha based on these kind of basic kind of principles. And then they manipulated the scenario where they actually took out, I think, the alpha for a little while. And someone will have to read the study because I don't remember exactly what the pieces were. But what they found was having like the untouchable, and I don't know the correct term, but the one that like no one really liked in an alpha position for a very long time, changed them genetically.
Wow.
And similarly, the alpha got brought back in, was no longer an alpha. They studied these DNAs, the genes, and it changed them genetically. Like when they redid the test, and what they did with these particular, I'm not a scientist, I forget what they're called. Like I'd have to look it up, like phenomes or something.
It's honestly, phenotype. Changes.
Phenotype. It like ignited these, like honestly, genes that were not really like active until they were put into a scenario, an environment that changed them. And what they found was these particular monkeys actually had, children that had those already kind of lit up and ready to go. Those DNA were actually active. And
now
activated.
The thing is, hold on. Epigenetics, as it is described, is of the expression of phenotypes that has nothing to do with the DNA. So understand, if it starts going with alternations to the DNA sequence, by definition, it would not be epigenetics at this point.
So, but basically, so they got the untouchable to become an alpha, right? That's what they did. And then by making the untouchable an alpha, the untouchable developed genes that may basically alpha genes.
I gotta use the bathroom. Sorry. Super sorry.
It's okay. And then
I may not be here when you come back, Frank.
We'll wait for Frank, and then But the untouchable transmitted basically alpha genes to the untouchable's kid monkeys, right? His offspring. So his offspring actually got alpha genes. Is that what happened?
Yeah.
Wow.
Again, you need to be, and I think Frank started to point out, you need to be a little careful when you're talking about genes here. What we're talking about are behaviors, right? What epigenetically gets transmitted across generations are behaviors. Not
But okay, but that's insane. That means that we are able to, based on our behaviors, pass that down.
Wow, that's pretty.
Well, yeah, sure. Look at it this way. If
right?
my
Like
mother
that's something that was like completely not even believed, like years and years and years ago.
If my mother is sick while she's pregnant with me, which she was, I can be born nearly an albino, which I was. That would be a phenotype, that would be an observable, but it did not cause genetic mutation, as far as I know. I don't think I've like turned into one of Professor Xavier's mutants or anything like that. So, but the effect of, and like you were talking with the Irish and the potato famine, it isn't just the gene, right? The DNA that happens, it's also the nutritional value and all the biochemistry that goes in forming from a fetus to a baby.
But we're talking about like generations, so we're not just talking about the people who lived in Ireland or and then like had children there and then traveled, you know, just like a couple generations. We're talking about a fourth generation. You can do a genetic test and tell whether or not their ancestors survived famine. And I mean, Frank brought up a good point. Like, is this just like the fact that we can cite that they're from Ireland? No, we're saying that there's a particular gene that we believe was triggered during that time period based on survival mechanisms that was not really in that population prior.
I mean, from what I've heard, epigenetics is like a real scientifically verified thing. Like, so, Craig, are you saying that you're not sure? But like Craig, are you like skeptical of epigenetics, or?
I'm saying that I don't think we understand it fully yet, and until we have a deeper understanding, which is going to take time, right? Because this is the kind of thing that needs to be studied across multiple generations. So it's going to take a lot of time. Even
like, what could
probably
it mean?
100 years or 150 years is probably not sufficient.
It can mean a lot.
Let's imagine it's true, and if it is true, just let's bring it to the philosophical.
Factual.
So it's like the ontological.
All right, I'll go with Frank. Let's believe it is factual. And what does that mean? Can we read into anything? I feel like I am going to head out for tonight, but I want to leave that like.
Well, let's just have like a mini conversation, and then we can.
He's not letting it go. He's like, no.
You are asking a question, so you can't ask a question and leave immediately.
Okay.
That should be one of the rules. Let's have just a 10-minute conversation. Okay,
so it is factual that it can be brought about without expression can be brought about without alterations to the DNA.
Well, look,
sure. Of course it is, and that just means that expression was a potential of that particular genetic sequence to begin with.
Based off, but I want to more so based off of what Allison seems to be getting at, which seems to be more so less of epigenetics and more so of artificial Darwinism.
You're thinking of Lamarckism, right? And I don't think we're heading towards Lamarckism with this.
Well,
which artificial Darwinism is possible.
You know, people were talking about poverty in the chat as well, so we can just make that our like very mini conversation. But that could be an example of epigenetics, right? If someone is born from poor parents, couldn't they inherit that sort of behavior?
Can we obviously poor isn't a behavior, but I guess how you deal with being poor, maybe saving money a lot, or just a sort of scarcity mindset, maybe that would be the behavior you inherit.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing that I meant. Those behaviors that are associated with poverty.
Yeah.
So we think so, right? According to those studies. Maybe not.
See, the problem here is we would have to look at this and we would have to say with a degree of certainty that people as they are born to their parents in certain situations that they have lived in over time have inherent those tendencies, not because of their environment, but because genetic expression. Not even genetic expression, phenotype expression. It can't be DNA expression. That's the part where I would look at it and say, well, where are we observing from? And they would say, well, of course, we're observing these people from the society that they're currently in, they've been in. And then we go back to Blaine's argument. The whole way that DNA was able to work out with RNA is we actually had to abstract it onto a mathematical plane that we could actually have bijective functionality.
Could African Americans have that sort of genetic poverty, like in them, or genetic
What
behavior
genetic
inherited?
property would that be, Bruno?
Just that those behaviors, because in the chat people are asking like what makes people what
It sounds dangerously like phrenology.
what's that?
Yeah. I'm trying to understand what you're trying to get at, Bruno.
I'm just trying to come up with an example. We should discuss, maybe we should continue the conversation in the next one.
Okay.
Because Allison asked for an example. So I'm trying
Well,
to come
and
up with
here's an
example.
interesting thing. We have talked about, just to bring this to
Okay.
kind of a positive realm, I guess. I mean, Black Americans, have in some sense, it's my view that they have experienced, in terms of decades of people being brought in as slaves, and then, had to live as free slaves in society. I mean, this is somewhat of a trauma.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah,
and if we're talking about that, a trauma could affect a group of people to their genetic level, that could affect, things that are beyond what we can, readily see. It's something that has been talked about. I mean, we're talking about reparations for abuse that has occurred over decades.
But that's the thing. We can understand trauma and how it's inherited via DNA. And furthermore, we can even understand it by understanding chemical imbalances of the brain of the individual. There are tons of causal information that I can work off of that. When we say you inherited it because, that's the problem with epigenetics, you inherit it because they were slave ships that were put here and they worked as slaves and then they were freed and there was trauma over here. The problem that comes from generation is then I would say, okay, did this person to this person have like brain states with like amount of dopamine or anything for those areas to derive proper analogy? And then furthermore, can I show that that is coinciding with what I have of the DNA as it went from person to person to person, as it was passed down? Can I show a causal relation from that? And then after that, can that be sufficient to prove why this person has that problem?
Okay, I feel like I've gotten used to listening to Frank talk at this point, and I'm like, okay, I feel like I don't totally understand you, Frank. But
I'm sorry.
It's sort of like like in those Viking shows. Now there's lots of them, and I absolutely love those Viking shows. You listen to the seer talk. And it's it comes in riddles, but there's this wisdom that comes with it. But you have to interpret it. It's an interpretation job.
Logic, you have failed me.
Actually, there's a great show. Have you seen Barbarians? Sorry.
Mm-mm.
You're really into this right now, apparently.
Barbarians?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good, man.
It's on HBO?
It's on Netflix.
Oh, okay.
Netflix.
I have Netflix.
Okay, so look, we need to continue the conversation, because now next time, because we need to talk about Barbarians, but we also need to talk about The Good Place, because I want to have that conversation with you, Allison. So,
honestly, I would love to have people watch The Good Place and talk about it. It feels like a classic kind of philosophical, and
I'll have that conversation with you. We'll do that next time.
Cool, because I feel like we were born in some sense about it's fun and it's philosophy and it's about things that are relate to humans, and that I'm just excited.
Okay, so I think maybe we can end it here. Maybe people can make their final remarks. I think one thing that I find interesting that we could talk about next time as well, this idea of epigenetics and how does that relate to the difference in genders can masculinity and femininity, can that have a genetic component to it, or can some behaviors that are attributed to masculinity or femininity can that be motivated by epigenetics? I think that could be an interesting idea. What about you guys? Some final remarks?
Okay, so based on that final remark, and I'm gonna head out here soon, but
Everybody.
masculine, feminine. I know we talked a lot about it today, but I've been watching The Vow, which is about this cult, basically. And one of the interesting why I kind of brought it up to this group's attention was because it is founded in a philosophy that they actually patented. And the interesting thing is that they came up with like the Society of Protectors, and then this like female group of protectors, and they really had solidified views on what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman in society, and they were based in what they considered, philosophy. So I'd be kind of curious to like have people maybe either watch it. It's on HBO. I know, Bruno, you have it, but like just to hear what people think in general about like how far you can go with kind of talking philosophy and then getting to a point where like maybe it's dangerous, but I don't know.
Well, another show we're going to have to discuss.
Yep. And that's all I have for you guys
What
today.
about that was
right,
beautiful.
well, my
That was
final
just beautiful,
remarks
Allison.
are good night and stay healthy and safe.
Anyone
You
else
too,
has
Craig.
final remarks, or should we end it here?
I think I'll go last.
No, you. Okay. Yeah, good talk.
Thanks. Good job, Craig.
Good
Good
talk.
talk.
Frank.
Okay, bye everyone.
Good night.
Michael, you had something to say, or you want to go last?
I think we can save it for the next time. But yeah, I enjoyed chatting. So yeah, good to see all of you.
Okay,
Good
this
to
is
do.
actually Michael's first meeting with us. So thank you so much, Michael.
It's mine too.
Thank you for coming. You made a fantastic contribution. So we're glad to have you.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for watching, whoever's watching. So, and thank you for coming, guys.
Yep. Bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.